Hi, my name's Ellie. Thanks for joining me today. We are currently on part 4 of an 8-part series, and I've been going gung-ho, haven't I? I've filled up the airways with all kinds of words. And so if you are popping in for the very first time, don't worry, you don't have to go back and watch 1, 2 and 3 before you watch today. I'm going to link the previous episodes into the description for today's show, just in case you want to catch up later. We've been talking about the way that the current world that we live in around us is simply a reflection of the ancient world that was described in end times prophecy. And no, I feel like I have to say this every time. I am not a religious zealot, okay? I'm just not. I'm not half the things people call me these days. I'm not religious, and this is not really about religion. What this is it's about trying to understand all of those little things that seem to be cropping up in every aspect of reality and how they might be related to one another. That's the kind of thing that I do here on this channel. So in episodes 1, 2 and 3, we looked at the 3 first heads of the beast that are described as part of end times prophecy. And they are represented in the Bible as being Egypt as the first head, the second head is Assyria, and the third head is Babylon. What we've been able to do so far is to identify the definition of the civilization relating to end times prophecy, the theme of each of those societies, and how that theme translates into the modern world, and how we're still being influenced by those very same themes. But in addition to that, I've also pulled from study that I've done in Gnosticism, and in particular, my favorite Gnostic book, which is the book, my favorite so far, which is the Book of Mary, in which Mary talks about Jesus explaining to her that there are 7 dark powers that keep humanity trapped and prevents us from being able to ascend or to transcend our current reality. And those 7 dark forces, I've been able to identify how they link to the 7 heads of the beast. But what makes it really exciting is that in the Book of Mary, there's also clues as to how to defeat each of those beasts. And so we're looking at that as well. And I'm building up a little repertoire. And then in episode 8, once all those 7 beast heads have been eliminated, we're going to look in episode 8 at this bigger picture of how they're all working together and what they might want to achieve, so that we kind of are able to see what might very well be coming at us now and in the future. All right, so if you really, really wanted to start at the beginning, you could always take a look at my episode on the Book of Mary. I'm going to include a link to that in today's show. I'm also going to include a link about where I'm discussing the fact that there are new emerging religions, because that is kind of a prelude to this series as well. I'll include a link to that. And then, of course, I'm including a link to episodes 1, 2 and 3, and this is episode 4, the 4th beast, which is represented by the ancient civilization of Medo Persia. Now, the Medo Persian Empire rose in the 6th century before Christ. It stretched from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean Sea, and it swallowed up many nations and languages and religions until it grew to become one great big massive system. It was called Medo Persia because it combined 2 ancient empires that were called Media and Persia and turned them into a single larger massive empire. Now, all of the ancient empires were ruled by darkness. When you have people oppressed by some kind of darkness, it makes all of the other darknesses that appear as the 7 dark forces in Gnosticism so much easier to achieve. So yes, Medo Persia did rule with darkness. That was the Egyptian contribution that continues until the current day, even if it has kind of changed form. But unlike Syria, which was episode 2 of this series, which was the next civilization that we covered, Medo Persia didn't rule with things like fear and chaos. Instead, it ruled with a kind of a brand new kind of a trick. It used order. You know, Order and control and keeping everything categorized and with a big old bureaucracy, strict rules and regulations. Men, we understand that concept. Yeah, especially those of us who've lived in Britain, for example. There's a lot of order, a lot of bureaucracy, but it's not just in Britain, it's actually all over the world. Just dealing with your local council anywhere is enough to teach anyone about ruling with order. Such a slow and bureaucratic kind of process with people who only seem to know the bit that they're getting paid to do, but they sure are bossy and stuff like that. Yeah, the council, that's a great place to start. Or the town hall or whatever it is it's called in your country. This empire perfected the art of administration. And there was quite a hierarchy associated with it. The way that it worked was that the king sat at the top. He was far removed from the common people, but his power was still felt by everyone. It flowed down through people and roles like governors and tax collectors and treasurers and generals and scribes. Everything had an office from which it operated from, and every office had a seal of approval. So, the wax seal or something like that that they would put that had to be officiated before it could be assumed to be true. And that was what the bureaucracy was all about. Unless it had the seal, it didn't exist. Now, I recently did a video about the secret societies that evolved from ancient civilizations of order, including the Illuminati, for example, the Bilderberg Group, and others. And I linked those secret societies to a particular verse in the Gnostic book of Thomas. I was able to show that the Gnostics knew what the real purpose for scribes was. So scribes are often believed to be people from the ancient world that just documented things, right? But that isn't what the scribe's job was. The purpose of the scribe as a figurehead working for the king was to make sure that history stated what the king wanted it to state, even if it wasn't quite true. That was the role of the scribe. Just a tiny, inconsequential little blip in detail. They'd just tweak it until it would become the new history. They all had their roles, but they created new processes that are still kind of alive today. They created one of the first postal systems, for example, which was actually referred to as the royal road for the king or something. It's where messages and money and things would travel across continents. They standardized the weight system and the measurement system, and they developed coinage that made trade possible by standardizing the cost of things. And they even created laws that were so binding that once they were officiated, even the king couldn't change them. That's pretty official. This is actually discussed in the book of Daniel in the Bible. What it states in the book of Daniel is that any officials in the administration who might have been jealous of the king, for example, all they had to do was find a way for him to officiate laws that would ultimately be used against him in the future. So, for example, in Daniel chapter 6, verse 8, it states as follows: "Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not." So as you can see, once the king signed the decree, he was bound by it. And so if an official wanted to destroy the king, he could figure out a decree that kind of looked attractive to the king. It would be something that would appear on the surface to empower the king, when in fact it was there to weaken him. If this sounds at all familiar to you, it might be because you're living in a state or a country that does this to its citizens. Okay, probably not on quite an extreme level, but it's still happening. It talks up a wonderful proposal, a policy proposal for the future, gets you to buy into it by voting for the people who support that proposal, but the fine print basically includes some major concessions that actually end up disadvantaging the very people that it claims to be helping. When you hear about the aftermath of people voting for someone who ultimately kind of let them down. Well, a lot of that has to do with this Medo Persian kind of legacy. Medo Persia got its strength from bureaucracy. It was a machine that offered and promised stability because the bureaucracy would be very stable, wouldn't it? And it did deliver that stability. Sure, except it was stable, but that stability came at a cost. Your life was not your own in that system if you lived at that time. You were managed, you were filed, and you were taxed, and you were ruled, basically, not through brute force like Assyria, for example, but through a quiet daily weight of law and order and management of wealth possibility. It wasn't really your wealth. They kind of kept you too busy to be wealthy. You'd have to jump through a lot of hoops because of the bureaucracy and all the rules. Their wealth, those who were in control, their wealth was being stabilized and kept and maintained, and which allowed them to create an even bigger burden every day with a bigger and bigger bureaucracy that was designed to keep everything just as it is, where the poor are poor, the middle are middle, and the rich are rich. And that's basically it. The whole point of maintaining order was officially to provide stability so that the people could feel safe. But the Bible links this method of ruling to a much deeper issue that derives from the heart. And the issue of the heart relates to desire. You wouldn't ordinarily think that order is linked to something like desire, would you? Desire is an emotion, and order is a state of being, and they look as though they're like chalk and cheese. Except the Bible shows the connection, and it does it in a really clever way. Throughout the book of Daniel, and particularly in chapter 6, there's a decree that condemns Daniel to a legal process that is very orderly and organized, and it sounds like it's very fair, because he's being put through a system of a kind of justice, right? So, they say that this due process, and everybody wants due process, because due process is where the bureaucracy does its thing and everything happens as it should, and ultimately, because the due process has occurred, then it must reach the right conclusion, right? Okay, except the process was being carried out against Daniel, and was an unfair process. It was an unjust process. Daniel's enemies had crafted a law that targeted his faith, and then they rendered it unchangeable because it was the law, and they used it to condemn him for obeying God rather than obeying the king. Now, once again, we have to remember that the word God didn't actually exist in the book of Daniel or anywhere in the Bible. So the word God is a word that derives from a very different word, which is really about proclaiming positivity when it comes to sowing seed or something like that. It was the ancient farmers, and I have mentioned this a few times, the ancient farmers might plant seed or do something for their harvest, and then they would proclaim a word that was very similar, that was kind of like making hope that everything will go well with their harvest. And that ultimately became an invocation that then became almost like a prayer, and then it became God. And then that word was transposed into the Bible to replace a variety of other words that appeared in ancient Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic. So if you go back to the original translation of Daniel chapter 6, it's written in, the original language is in Aramaic. And the word used in the context of Daniel's experience was actually the Aramaic word Ella, which is the singular term for the plural word Elohim. I've produced many videos on this channel showing that the words of the Bible really matter. They do. If they are mistranslated, then it skews the entire message and takes the story down an entirely different path of understanding. If we translate Daniel correctly and use the correct translations of the original Aramaic texts, then at the very least, Daniel was being persecuted for obeying an entity that wasn't the king. And it might not even have been human. We don't know, right? It just was an entity that wasn't the king. I did an episode on the Gnostic Gospel of Judas, which appears to be all about aliens as well. Man, they seem to crop up everywhere. Daniel may have already possessed the necessary divinity to rule himself. You see? And that's the context that makes this particular head of the beast really interesting, especially as it's translated through the Bible, when the Bible is really translated word for word correctly. If Daniel was relying on himself as the divine source of truth, that may have upset those who were working for the king. And Daniel may very well have been persecuted based on the laws that made it unlawful for him to think for himself. And instead he had to worship and follow the king. He was deprived of that right by the laws of the king. His ability to think for himself and to direct himself and to live freely was constrained by law and order. And that's what the Bible says. Potentially. It all depends on that one little word. And isn't it funny how every single time there's a possibility that people could be empowered by some kind of gnosis or divine knowledge, the little word that makes all the difference gets turned into the word God instead. It's just something that, if I have a big question mark above my head, that's the reason why. The Bible ties this kind of rule to the heart's desire for things like pleasure, but also to safety and prosperity and security. People hunger for a system that will take care of us so that we don't have to simply rely on our faith, because faith is a mystery. It's based in mystery and it can be scary. It's like not knowing which direction to walk in because everything is based on faith. Desire is what makes bureaucracy powerful. If you crave stability above everything else, you will submit yourself to almost anything. You will give up your personal freedom. You may give up the Ella that you are to be able to have a system that keeps things going. It keeps the streets quiet and free from crime. It keeps everything organized and bureaucratic and disciplined through this administration of your life. But the thing that you've bargained with is your freedom to think and your freedom of movement and your ultimate personal liberty. Just think about the key election issues that resulted in the election of Donald Trump, as an example, in 2024. The two biggest things that people ultimately wanted related to economy and maintaining order. They wanted secure borders. They wanted migration to be under control. They wanted the police to be strengthened. They wanted the economy to be secured. And they wanted prices to go down and to feel safer in their homes and to feel safer with their bills. And they had a desire for greater prosperity. And so they voted, whether they realized it or not, for a strengthening of the bureaucracy, because it's the bureaucracy that maintains the economy and order. Did I just explode your head? But the people say freedom, freedom, and so they vote for bureaucracy, which is the exact opposite of freedom. Freedom is where you get to think for yourself. Things may be a little crazy around you, but you have freedom of movement and you have ultimate liberty. When you vote for the bureaucracy, you're voting for order, and order is there to control. That's exactly what happened to the Israelites in the Bible. The Israelites chose to be oppressed by bureaucracy in exactly the same way. And the proof is written in the Bible. It actually appears in Exodus chapter 14, verse 12, as follows. It says here, "Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness." It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. There you go. Wearing the golden chains of bureaucracy feels a lot safer than having to go it alone. And that's why this fourth head of the beast that derives from Medo Persia is still alive and breathing today. The Medo Persian beast head hasn't died at all. It's simply changed form. It kind of metamorphized in ways over the years. We don't call it an empire anymore. Now we call it the system. Does that sound familiar? The system? The system is this, the system is that. That's just part of the system, yeah? And in particular, we now have a digital system, which is the most prevailing and invasive system of all. The principles are exactly the same. Promise safety and security and stability, but instead use those very same things as a cage in which to trap us. Like global finance runs on things like contracts and digital ledgers, and we're told that it's all about transparency and fairness, right? But just like in the ancient world, once it's written into the code, it's binding, whether it serves justice or not. It's just kind of the way it is because that's the way the system works. Yeah, all of these words are starting to sound familiar, aren't they? And that's the reason why something like crypto has become so popular and alluring these days. It's the desire acting out. Except, I'm sorry to say this to crypto people, it's no different to any other kind of banking system ultimately. Crypto is described to be a sort of a decentralized financial promise of salvation, where you're going to be completely free. You'll have your liberty. It makes really bold statements like, be your own bank, free yourself from the old system. Yeah, but in the shadow, crypto still feeds the same appetite, the desire for security, the hope that money will shield us from chaos. This is why things like crypto cults are starting to rise these days, because believe it or not, they are. It's not just about trading money. It's also about building a faith system around the trading of money. And the reason why crypto is still a way to control people is because it's entirely digital. Bureaucracy is algorithmic now. It involves things like digital ID programs, social credit systems, and automated compliance. It's another style of creating order. And this kind of order is a little bit different because it can see you everywhere. It's constantly watching, and it's watching very closely. It's recording every move you make, and it's creating a scoreboard that tracks the value of every single person who engages with it. The hook is always the same. It's safety, stability, and the promise that if you play by the rules, you will prosper. The desire is to prosper. The rules are that you must play by the rules in order to prosper. But just like in the book of Daniel, the rules can be changed in an instant. And when they are changed, then instantly the stability that you may have created for yourself becomes a cage that can be created for you to live in. And you don't have to believe me, especially if you're married to your crypto, because I'm not a crypto expert. I don't claim to be at all. I actually don't care for crypto at all. But you can tell what's really happening very, very easily when it comes to that, because the wealthier are becoming richer and richer and richer. Have you noticed? And smaller in number. We can almost count them. The crowds of people who are struggling are getting bigger, whereas there are a handful of people at the top, more than ever before. The bureaucracy, however it manifests, whether it's ancient, modern, done in analog or digital style, is continuing to grow and strengthen, and it still rules us with order. So the Gnostic text warned of powers behind the powers, not just kings and councils and all the administrative bureaucracies, but also these mysterious entities that were called archons. The archons were the ones who really created and kept alive the rules of reality and society. In Gnostic thought, the archon is not something or someone who injects chaos into the world, nothing like that. It actually is orderly by nature. It has a special gift, which is also its special weapon, and that is the structure that it creates for us to live in. That's the gift that it gives us, but it's also the method of control. It shapes the world with rules, and it makes everything kind of set up really nicely so that the human rulers are also bound by those rules, and they become willing participants. It creates a pattern of existence that allows the richer people and the more powerful people to also feel safe, because that way they will end up enforcing the rules on behalf of the archons. Okay, so you can see this in play right now. At the time of recording this episode, it is the 27th of August, 2025. And we are 8 weeks into a very long news cycle about the Jeffrey Epstein files. Okay, for anyone who's been living under a rock, Jeffrey Epstein is that fellow who supposedly died in prison after being caught, not for the first time, interfering with underage girls and trading them to his rich friends. I don't think he's dead, but that's just me. That's just my personal opinion, and everyone has their own opinion on that. So, some think that he committed suicide, others think he was murdered, and then some believe that he kind of disappeared and is living a cushy life somewhere, maybe with a bit of plastic surgery or something, and maybe he's still walking around the streets of New York for all we know. Personally, for me, I don't actually think he's dead, but just take that with a grain of salt if you like. At the moment, there's this 8-week-long news cycle about the Epstein files. This little black book or list or whatever it is that shows who his clients were that he used to trade girls to. And there are people out there, they might be psychic, they might be psychologists or political pundits or activists or whoever. There are people out there who are convinced that the Epstein files containing the list of names of willing participants will one day be released very soon. In fact, I think a lot of people are saying before Christmas, right? Well, I'm here to tell you, I don't reckon it's going to happen. It's not going to happen anytime soon. Never, ever, ever. Because releasing it means the system of order and control will collapse. It's much bigger than just pointing to this guy and that guy, whether he's an academic or a politician or a sports hero or, a chaplain or whoever, and saying you're one of the Johns for the Epstein client list. It's more than that because everyone is implicated. It's a very complex web. And Jeffrey Epstein was, or perhaps still is, depending on what you believe, one of the richest men in the world. And yet no one, even now, even after his death, no one seems to really know for a fact what he did for a living. How can that be? Even now that he's supposedly been dead for years, there's plenty of speculation, but nobody knows for sure. And you know why? Because if that was disclosed, it would collapse the system because there's such an intricate web involved. And that's archonic control. It's exactly the same thing. The system can't collapse. So as much as people try to get the list or figure out what Jeffrey did or didn't do or whatever, it will never be truly and fully revealed, regardless of who says what. At least not until the entire system is due to collapse. When the whole system is due to collapse, then we might see something. The mysterious archons, they don't care if you rebel. In fact, they've built that into the system. They have. You can protest as much as you want. Protesting is built into the system. It's been decreed into law. You can demand and shout in blogs or op-eds or on TV shows. That's the freedom of speech that has been decreed into law. It's been built into the system. So it's allowed. The archons have permitted it. And so if it ever gets out of hand, then you'll know because the algorithms will push it into the digital wilderness or the laws will end up getting changed. But for as long as you're allowed to do it, it's built into the system. The system is still in control with rules of order. There's only one thing that the system can't control, and that's your mind. It can't control your mind. And if your mind begins to see that the system exists, that's really dangerous. That's when the system is really at risk. Now, the Gnostics spoke of gnosis, which is the hidden knowledge of the divine. And the knowledge is not about facts, but it's about sight and awareness and elevating consciousness. It's about being aware of what exists. Once you see the bars that surround you in your cage, you realize that they're not built out of iron or anything like that. The bars of the cage that contain you are built out of the things that you've agreed to or that you've been trained to accept. It's like when I tell my dog to sit. Well, she tends to just bark at me and ignore me, but let's just say I had the kind of dog that when I told her to sit, she'd just sit. Well, she's been caged. She's been caged by the sound of my voice. Exactly the same way. As it turns out, I think I've got a Gnostic dog because, she just jumps on me or barks at me and tells me, don't tell me what to do, and then demands her ball or something. Yeah, so my dog is a totally different breed of dog. Seven years and counting. The way to get out of the control that's presented by this head of the beast is not to fight within the system for something better. It's to step out of the system altogether. Instead of playing the Archon's game, where we bargain down our life by agreeing to rules that are set by the Archons, we begin playing our own game. I've rummaged up what could potentially be 6 actions that we can take that encompass that refusal. The first action is to actually see the cage that surrounds us. Stop treating every law, every policy, every financial innovation as a neutral experience. Ask yourself, who benefits from this? And what is it going to cost me? The important thing is to get to understand what you're voting for and what you're signing up for with pretty much everything, and not taking other people's word for it as well. As you can see, it requires actual work. And that's the reason why it's so easy to just backslide into letting the system control you. Because in order to be in control for yourself, you have to put in the work. So the next action you could do is to reduce your dependence. Limit your reliance on systems that can be turned against you. Anything that requires your approval to go ahead is probably seeking your approval because later it can tell you that you agreed to it. If you have any vulnerability, these are things that are probably there to support you as well, but they also contain you. Nothing ever comes for free. Just remember that. Every new permission that you give to anything is a permission to set the rules by how you live. So use that agreement really sparingly. The third action you can take is to set your boundaries. Just like Daniel did in the Bible, he decided in advance the lines that he would not cross, no matter what happens. Now, I did this recently, back in November, nearly a year ago now. I set a firm line for myself. I was not going to produce content here on YouTube that pretends to be helpful, but is actually just an empty promise. I'm just not going to do that. The easiest way to get rich on YouTube is to throw out a lot of empty promises. I guess that means I'm never going to be rich. Oh, bummer. But being rich has never really been a motivation for me anyway, so, whatever. But at least I know who I am, and I'm very proud of what I'm doing here. I feel as though if my mother or my grandmother or anyone who was getting to know me came and watched the channel, then they would see that I'm a real person who's working very hard and trying to add value. People may not agree with me, and we don't have to all agree, but at least you can see that it's coming from a genuine place because of how much effort I put into everything that I do. And that is my boundary, is I'm just not going to chuck a whole bunch of empty promises at people and then count the cash. And so that's just an example, but there are so many examples, and they all make up a part of who we are, which is actually one of the further steps down this list. So the fourth step is to build parallel channels. This is where you share the resources of what you know with other people. You share your skills, you share the truth outside of the official channels. The internet's wonderful for this. We do have the monitoring aspects. We do have algorithmic aspects that get in the way. But the good thing about the internet is that we're able to communicate with people from unexpected places and share information and share truth that can't really be easily contained. That's a wonderful thing. And we should always make the best of that. Make friends offline as well as online, people that you actually see in person as often as you can, because these are things that can't be tracked. These are things that are really organic and natural and real, and it's part of living a simple life. And also live a simple life as much as you can. Pay off your debts if you're able to, and try not to accumulate new ones by expecting too many complicated things in your life, so that you're truly free. And that your personal life is actually personal and things like that. People who live in a state of simplicity are far more difficult to buy off because they've found a lifestyle that is free and doesn't need to be purchased. Being able to live without having to compromise yourself is a wonderful gift of freedom that many people often forget the true value of. And then the sixth action is you can create your own constitution. Now, I went off and I talked about how I'd drawn a line for myself. This is just an example of that. Now we're looking at the bigger picture. Regardless of what wisdom you ascribe to, whether it's the Gospel of Mary or a book from the Bible or a set of personal values that you've gathered over many decades of your life, this is your constitution. This is the constitution that you possess. Make sure you understand what your personal constitution is really all about. If you have to write it down, maybe even write it down. Be sure that this is actually who you are before you commit to it, and then commit to it. Stick to it, because that's the real you. And once you have your constitution sorted out, it will help to guide you throughout the rest of your life, because it will always take you in the direction of your own values rather than someone else's. A bureaucratic empire needs your consent in order to function. If you withdraw from the entire empire whenever you can and instead give your allegiance to the kingdom that you truly believe in, which is part of your constitution, then you become your own structure of safety that nobody and nothing can destroy. You become unshakable, and you will have conquered the fourth beast. Every throne that houses every king eventually shakes and quivers until the king that it served has finally been toppled. And the moment one person refuses to bow to the king, the cracks begin to show. That's how empires end. They don't ask for your permission to end. They end when 1,000 little cracks appear, little small acts of defiance that begin to mount up. One choice at a time until the machine runs out of people who are willing to operate it. And often it's because people have begun to work on something better. And that's the answer. They no longer live to serve the system of the king. They're building their own system instead, a new system. The cracks of our current existence are already forming. If you've seen them, if you've seen those cracks appearing, then you might already know one little thing that can help the cracks to spread even further. Share your ideas in the comments. You never know who might see them, and you never know where your ideas may end up and what it might create in the future. Your idea, your tiny little idea, might end up being the seed that fertilizes the foundation of the brand new age. So that's 4 beasts down and only 3 to go. Welcome to the new world. This is Ellie Dreams Down Under. I love knowing you're here, and I'll see you in my dreams.